This meeting is being recorded and streamed live on Stroud District Council's YouTube channel. Speaking, please ensure your microphone is on mute throughout the meeting unless you have been invited to speak. If you wish to speak, please use the raise hand function, which can be found by clicking the participant button and clicking on the blue hand. If you can't find this, please wave your hand in front of the camera to signal when you wish to speak. The chat function is only to be used by officers communicating with the chair. Please do not use this to send messages, as they will not be recorded or shown in the live broadcast and can be distracting. When referring to a specific report, page or slide, please mention the report, page or slide so that all members have a clear understanding of what is being discussed at all times. Loss of connection. If we lose connection, then please bear with us. We will try and recover the meeting as soon as we can. If a member loses their internet connection, I will pause the meeting for up to 5 minutes to determine whether the connection can be re-established, either by video technology or telephone. If the connection is not restored, the meeting will continue, providing the meeting remains quorate. But any member who has been disconnected will not be able to vote on the matter under discussion, as they would not have heard all the information. Okay? So we'll start off with apologies. Any apologies? Nate?
Yes. Sorry, I didn't
Stephen?
stick my hand up.
Yes, sorry, Stephen.
Yeah, so thank you, Chair. We have a number of apologies. So Steve Pearson and Debbie Young can't make this evening for personal reasons. Mark Reeves couldn't move a business appointment, a family appointment he had when we moved the date of this meeting. Nick Hurst, Tom Skinner and Jessica Tomlins will be late because they had prior engagements that they couldn't move due to this meeting being changed. But they will be along as soon as they can make it, and Dave Mossman is unable to join us as well.
Is that Dave Mossman unable?
Unable to join as well. He said.
Right, thank you, Stephen. Doina?
Thank you. I think we have only one apology from Councillor Denny. He may be joining late, but just in case he doesn't.
All right. Thank you, Doina. Martin?
Thank you very much. John Marjoram has another engagement, and Jim Dewey has a family sickness, and I'm not sure whether he may try and come here, but he may not be able to come.
All right. It's all right, Martin. Jim's here now.
Oh, good. Okay, that's fine.
All right. Is that all?
That's it.
Okay.
I'm here as well.
Who's that? Nick? Who's that? Right.
Nick Hurst, Chairman.
Okay, Nick. Okay. Now, declaration of interest. Please raise your hand if there's any declarations of interest. Any? No. Is it agreed? Minutes. Is it agreed that I can sign the minutes of the meeting of 17th of December 2020? Please clearly wave your hand in front of the camera to support, or if you wish to make a comment, use the blue raised hand function. Anyone? No one? You're happy for me to sign then? Okay.
Sorry, excuse me. I can see that Councillor Chess Townley was indicating.
Chess Townley? Do you want to say something, Chaz?
Sorry, no, I was waving my hand to say yes.
Oh, right. Thank you, Chaz. Right. 6B, Strategy and Resources Committee, 11th of February 2021. Oh, sorry. I beg your pardon. I'll turn the page over. Haven't I? Bottom of the other one. Sorry, members. Announcements. This is an announcement from the chair. Sorry about that. With the council leader, I recently met with Tom Scholes-Fogg, a serving police officer who was canvassing for support to erect an emergency cenotaph in memory of those in the services who had lost their lives serving the communities. The proposal is that a cenotaph be sited in London at a place not yet found, that a day of remembrance be held on the 9th hour of the 9th day in the 9th month. He says that such a service is held for the police officers, but would like to be extended for fire, sea rescue, ambulance and hospital workers. So far, they have raised over £100,000, but need to find 1 million. A monument has been commissioned which depicts figures from all the services. His question to us is, do you want to support this venture and how? Obviously, he means money. Does anyone wish to comment now, or do you wish to come back to the next council meeting with this? Yeah? We discuss it at the next council meeting then? Doina?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, it was a really interesting meeting, and it's a project that's been developing some time, and it has support from across the spectrum, including from the royal family. So it's a really exciting project, and I think they're in talks with the royal parks to find a location for the monument. There wasn't really a big ask from us as a council to necessarily to provide a lot of funding, because they're being quite successful with that. But it was really if we'd like to support it, and there's a suggestion that obviously at the moment it's impossible with the pandemic, but when the restrictions ease, they'd like to do a tour. They're going to create a maquette of the monument. And the ask to us we were one of the first sort of councils in the southwest to respond positively, that they do a tour and we'd provide somewhere where people could come and have a look at it. So it was really around supporting it and really raising awareness of the monument, but also of this proposed day. So I think it would be a great thing to support. So it's just to mention it to councillors, and I guess we'll get more information going forwards as that develops as a proposal.
Thank you, Doina. There's no one else asking to speak. No. Norman? Norman?
Thank you, Chair. As a long-standing member of the British Legion, I've often wondered whether we ought to also be recognising other groups of services who place themselves in harm's way to protect us, particularly the police. And so I certainly, and I gather from what the leader is saying and others, would be sympathetic in principle with this. And when we get the opportunity to discuss it, I'll be glad to join in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. Okay then, so we move on to item 5, interim report of the Independent Remuneration Panel. Members' allowance to Stroud District Council. I think, Ken Tucker, you're going to speak on this?
Yes, I am, Chair. Thank you. The report before you sets out the recommendations of the Independent Remuneration Panel to increase the existing members' information and communications technology, IT allowance and provision, the level of which was previously set in 2010. Before we ask Graham Russell, the chair of the IRP, to present the panel's report, I would like to outline some of the work of the members' working group that has enabled us to get to this point. Traditionally, a review of all elected members' allowances has been carried out approximately every 4 years ahead of the elections the following year and covered both members' IT and basic allowances. However, due to the limitations imposed at the start of COVID-19, it was agreed that the review would be delayed until a more suitable time and wider consultations could be taken. With the 2020 elections subsequently being delayed until May 21, and the heightened need to address the limitations of the existing IT equipment provision and the allowances before that date, it was agreed that the members' working party would be set up to carry out a review and make recommendations to the IRP as to the level of allowance and provision considered. This cross-party members' working group comprised Councillor Matty Ross, Doina Cannell, Keith Pearson, Martin Baxendale and me as chair, supported by officers Hannah Emery, who acted as secretary, Karen Starkey, our strategic director of transformation, and Sean Ditchburn from our IT team. Following continual concerns with the use of Citrix as a suitable portal for members and 7 months of challenging remote working due to COVID-19, we were having need to adapt to remote meetings, larger increases in email traffic, difficulties in communication, and a greater reliance on technology to enable us to try and adequately fulfill our roles as elected members. This background has provided much for us, information for us to review. The remit of the working group was to review alternative communication software options for provision of hardware devices and the level of members' IT allowances to cover purchase of hardware. Terms of reference were formally adopted at the second meeting and were circulated to group leaders, as were notes of all significant stages throughout this process. Discussions were initially focused on options to replace the outdated software Citrix, and after consideration it was concluded that Microsoft Office 365 would provide the best solution for members' needs, whilst also having compatibility with SDC Office's requirements. Following upfront works by IT integration specialist Systems Up, a migration program for the overnight transfer of members' email portal to Office 365 was successfully completed to plan on the 22nd of January. Whilst home working has some attractions, members are keen to meet face-to-face again with officers and fellow members back at Ebley Mill. However, it is highly likely that some level of remote working is here to stay. Through Zoom, Teams and other web conferencing facilities, more information briefings from members from both internal and external sources have and continue to be made available. Attendance levels at such meetings are higher because we do not have to travel to Ebley, which as a consequence has significantly reduced members' claims for travelling expenses by up to 90%. Remote working has undoubtedly helped us to engage in different and hopefully better ways of working. The working group also set out to review whether councillors have the right level of software and hardware to adequately partake their roles and in their roles now and in the future, and allowance at a suitable level to enable this.
Ken,
Yes.
Ken, can I interrupt you? Can you speak just a little bit louder? One of our members is having trouble hearing you.
Okay.
Thank you, Ken.
I'll just see if I can turn it up a bit. Right.
Thank you, Ken.
Right.
Hello without.
Where did I get to? So the working group set out to review whether councillors have the right level of software and hardware to adequately partake their new roles now and in the future, and an allowance at a suitable level to enable this. An extensive survey was sent to all members, to which 43 out of 50 responded. The two significant outcomes were that the most members considered the current ICT allowance of £396 per term, which was set in 2010, was inadequate. Other members expressed a preference for an SDC managed device. Subsequently, the working group proposed two hardware options allowances for members, either access an allowance to purchase a laptop or tablet as well as other ancillary items such as a printer and a monitor, or access to an SDC managed laptop and access a smaller allowance for other items of ancillary equipment, such as printers and monitors. In making our recommendations, the group were very conscious of making what might be seen as an unjustifiable increases in allowances during the current economic downturn and unemployment. It is also worthy of note that inflation has reduced the purchasing power of that £396 since 2010 by over 25%. The requirement to participate in remote working is likely to be continued for the foreseeable future and has added costs. Members were mindful to ensure that newly elected councillors should not be inhibited by lack of equipment or funding to enable them to carry out their duties in full. In making our recommendations, the group are keen to emphasise that the level of our request for an increase in members' IT allowance should not be seen as a target, but more on a as needed and not on a must-have basis. Provision has also been made for the authorisation of special equipment for those with disability and others with special needs. In closing, the working group look forward to your full support for the resolution to revive members' IT equipment and allowances. Thank you, Chair. Would you like me to welcome Graham Russell, the Chair of the Independent Remuneration Panel, to propose his report?
Yes, thank you.
Graham?
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm assuming you can hear me. I am privileged to be the chair of your statutory IRP, and last year, as Councillor Tucker has said, we did start the normal 4-yearly full review of members' allowances, and a very important part of that was, of course, member IT and the allowance that was relevant for that. As has been stated, our review has been deferred because of the pandemic, but we did have an opportunity to speak to a number of councillors at that early stage. I've got to say that members' IT for us was particularly relevant, not so much in the situation that existed early last year, but more in the context of how a modern post-COVID council needs to operate in terms of supporting members in all of their roles. One of the most important things about these independent remuneration panel reviews is that the recommendations we offer to the council are evidence-based. And I have to say that at the moment, halfway through our review, if you like, there are already a few anomalies that have been identified, which we will be sharing with you as part of our full report. One of our driving principles is to recognise the implications and the barriers to being a councillor in a progressive authority, and to ensure that the recommendations we put forward to you do not of themselves create further barriers to being a councillor, to potentially standing for a councillor. And I am personally delighted that in the Working Party's report, we have proposals that have been worked up by members in consultation with members and aimed to meet the needs of all members. And that's a very important principle to your panel. Clearly, the allowance of £390 has lost a lot of its purchasing power. It was set 10 years ago, and that was clearly going to be an area on which the panel would need to focus. And in focusing on that particular issue, important principles to us are flexibility, the ability for the scheme to recognise the needs of all members, and effective delivery and support for all members, whether they choose to accept an allowance and go off and make their own purchases, or whether they want a Stroud District Council supported device. So taking the well thought out views of the Working Party, we believe that the recommendations that we've put forward, the allowance of £702, is the right way forward to meet what we believe are your needs, as I say, taking the evidence of your own Working Party. So I'm delighted to commend those recommendations to you in the hope that you will support them. And this is something that your panel will keep under constant review. I hope that we can be in a position to report to you later in the year on all outstanding matters to do with the current scheme of allowances. My thanks to Councillor Ken Tucker and to the Member Working Party. Thank you to you, Chair, for allowing me the opportunity to present my report, and I look forward to listening to the views of members. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Graham. Now, I see that Keith Pearson was going to second this, and he's not here, is he? So we should need a seconder for this.
I'll second it.
I'm happy to second, Chair.
It's all right, Matty. Stephen said he will. Okay. Do you wish to speak now, Stephen, or do you want to?
No, I'll happily speak at the end.
Okay. Right. You will have questions now then. Any questions? Here we go. George James.
Thank you. I'm going to assume that the managed SDC provided system will be security managed. So a councillor loses his or her laptop, the council can effectively delete any sensitive documents remotely. What are the security provisions going to be if a councillor so chooses to use their own device? Effectively, are we going to have any, is there going to be a sort of a security system that's going to be put in place so that some software is sort of remotely put onto a computer via the ICT department in order to, if a councillor loses their device, it can be sort of remotely deleted?
Yeah, I'm not sure we have anybody in the room that can answer that question tonight. It's a perfectly understandable, valid question, but this is about whether to increase the allowance. So I suggest that we get an answer for Councillor James and respond to him outside of the meeting.
All right, thanks.
Zana. All right. Thank you, Patrick. Nick Hurst.
Thank you, Chair. My question has a slightly selfish motivation. Given that we are effectively 1 year on from when we should have had an election, how far is this recommendation? Is it going to be retrospective? The reason I ask this question is I was forced to replace my laptop 3 months ago, and you know, so I'm effectively ahead of your recommendation. But is there any way in which that investment can be clawed back, please?
It's Hannah. Hello, we can answer. Andrew, can you answer that?
It's probably worth me having a conversation with you offline, Nick. We have for a few councillors where they've had to replace equipment, been able to help. So perhaps if you and I can have a conversation about that, and I can see what the circumstances were.
Thank you, Andrew. Nigel Cooper, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick question. The problem of broadband speed is something which seems to affect some councillors, but not others. Have the panel or the working group given any thought to that? I have no idea if there's any solution to it, but have they considered it? Thank you.
Can you answer that, Ken?
Yes, I can. Yes, it was discussed several times, Councillor Cooper. the majority of problems are actually what there is an inherent problem, obviously, with internet speed, but some of it is due to the package that people actually purchase. We would encourage that people get the best possible, and I say it is an ongoing thing we will look at, but there's nothing we can actually personally do ourselves to actually make your broadband better.
Thank you very much. Mine's fine. It's other people's I'm worried about.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. Okay, any more questions then? No? Right, is there any debate? No? No? Okay, Stephen, do you wish to speak? Catherine Braun, sorry.
I'd just like to thank all the councillors and everyone who's taken part in this work. When I joined the council, I had to buy some new IT equipment and I found it quite difficult to navigate the system, and I think this will be much better. So thank you to everyone who's put in all the time and consulted with all of us to help to make this happen.
Chair, before Stephen speaks, would you allow me to just speak for 1 minute, please?
We've got Martin wishes to speak first.
Okay, yeah.
All right, Ken. That's Ken, is it?
Yes.
Martin.
Thank you. No, I very much welcome this, and I'm aware of how much hard work has gone into it, and it's really excellent. I do note, and I think it's good that we have this maximum of 702 per member, and I think we need to recognise that in times of where many people are facing financial hardship at the moment, we need to be careful not to increase our expenses. At the same time, we really need to make it possible for all members of society to be councillors and not be put off by their inability to access enough IT equipment to do it. So I hope that this means that those people who don't have the equipment when they get elected can buy what they need, but those people that maybe when they get elected already have the equipment already don't feel the need to claim the full amount, maybe until at a later date when they may or may not need it. So I think this maximum is an important principle, because we all should be trying to minimize our costs to the public sector, at the same time enabling those people who need it to access what they need. So I really welcome this.
Thank you, Martin. Matty?
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, it was a very interesting group, and I fully take on board what Martin is saying there, because my initial reaction was, in this time of real constraints and hardship for people, we shouldn't be looking to ourselves. But then once we started discussing it and realizing how long it was and how much people were working from home and using their own equipment, it was a different story. But my main concern, and many of us on the group wanted to ensure that anybody who wanted to join the council, any new candidates, should make sure that they could do the job properly. Many people of younger generations don't have a battery of stuff like some of us oldies have. They live their lives with their smartphones. So we wanted to make sure that was there. And that's what convinced me that we were doing the right thing. We had some very lively discussions. We had some good discussions, but I think we made the right recommendation in the end. I'd like to thank everybody for their contribution. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Matty. All right. Ken, do you want to speak now, Ken? And then I'll go back to Stephen.
Yes, please, Chair. Thank you. I would just like to conclude really by thanking my fellow group members and our supporting officers for all their hard work. I believe that what we achieved in 4 months was absolutely amazing, and the benefits of the transition to Office 365 is, or at least should be, making significant benefits and efficiencies in the way we all work. On behalf of the rest of the group, I would particularly like to thank Hannah for all her support before, during and after meetings. And I would personally like to mention that her guidance has been invaluable to me as chair, much of it being emailed either late on Saturday or Sunday evening sometimes. I would also like to thank Graham and his fellow IRP panelists, Wim Bartlett and Chris Markley, for their guidance during this process, and also for your kind words tonight, Graham. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Then Stephen, and then we'll go to the vote.
Thank you, Chair. And I only wanted to second this because Keith was very keen that I thanked the group that worked on this. I know a lot of work went into this, and it's not always an easy subject for some of those involved. Keith would probably not mind me saying that. What's interesting, I think, with Office 365, which is one of the most successful rollouts of ITI I've ever seen, but that is probably a reflection on how bad its predecessor was. It does mean we can access it from a number of platforms, which should therefore reduce the need for people to buy new equipment on many occasions. So hopefully we can do that, but equally, I'm glad we're putting in an allowance so that people can, and we make being a councillor accessible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Stephen. And I'd like to thank the panel as well. And the 365 is absolutely marvellous. I can't wait to get on there now. Right, we're going to go to the vote now. The vote will be carried out by roll call by Jenna. When your name is called out by the Democratic Services Officer, unmute your microphone and clearly state whether you are for, against, or abstain. Okay, here's a tip. Have your cursor right next to your mute, your cursor arrow, and then you won't have to start searching for it. And then Jenna will let you know the result of the vote when everything's been declared. Okay, we're going to go into the vote.
Councillor Baxendale.
For.
Councillor Binns.
For.
Councillor Braun.
For.
Councillor Brine.
For.
Councillor Clifton.
For.
Councillor Cooper.
For.
Councillor Cornell.
For.
Councillor Craig. Councillor Gordon Craig.
Sorry, 4.
Thank you. Councillor Curley.
For.
Councillor Davis.
For.
Councillor Dewey.
4.
Councillor Edmonds.
For.
Councillor Fellows.
For.
Councillor Fryer.
For.
Councillor Green.
For.
Councillor Hall.
For.
Councillor Hurst.
For.
Councillor James.
For.
Councillor Job.
For.
Councillor Hayden Jones.
4.
Councillor John Jones.
For.
Councillor Norman Kay.
For.
Councillor Steve Lydon.
For.
Councillor McEwen.
For.
Councillor Miles.
For.
Councillor Oxley.
For.
Councillor Pickering.
For.
Councillor Powell.
For.
Councillor Prenter.
For.
Councillor Rather.
For.
Councillor Reid.
For.
Councillor Robinson.
For.
Councillor Ross.
For.
Councillor Studdock Kennedy.
For.
Councillor Sutton.
For.
Councillor Tipper.
For.
Councillor Townley. Councillor Chaz Townley. Councillor Chaz Townley. I'll come back in a moment. Councillor Tucker.
For.
Councillor Whiteside.
For.
Councillor Tim Williams.
For.
Councillor Tom Williams.
For.
And Councillor Townley. Chaz, I can't hear you.
I said 4 about 3 times.
Lovely, thank you. I can hear you now.
I could hear you.
That's unanimous, Chair.
That's unanimous. Thank you very much. We move on now to
You need to
recommend.
unmute yourself, Gary.
We move on now, recommendations from other committees, audit and standards. All right. Recommendations from other committees, Audit and Standards Committee, 26th of January 2021. Councillor Studder Kennedy will present this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The report before you this evening in the first part concerns matters which might be regarded to some extent as routine, but are necessary for the function and good governance of Council. Last year, on behalf of the Audit Committee, I reported a change in the investment strategy aimed at securing a better return for investments made by the Council. Despite the trials of the pandemic and reduction in interest rates elsewhere, that strategy has proved to be correct to date. However, Appendix C on page 39, which gives a view of the world at the time that report was written, notes that interest rates are not expected to rise for some considerable time. This may make significant returns on investment more difficult to achieve in the future. Now, the committee is asking and recommending to Council that we adopt the capital potential indicators for 21-22 and 22-23-24, approve the Treasury management strategy, approve the investment strategy 21-22 and the criteria specified, and approve the minimum revenue provision statement on page 21. Appendix B on page 38 of this report will give you an explanation of what the Prudential Indicators are for those who aren't familiar with them. To going through the report, why the Council prepares this report each year is discussed on page 18. And those criteria considered in doing so is shown on page 19. In particular, I would draw your attention to the first sentence in paragraph 1.4. It is a statutory requirement under section 33 of the Local Government Finance Act 1992 for the Council to produce a balanced budget. It goes on to say in summary that increases in costs resulting from increased capital expenditure must be affordable for the foreseeable future. Essentially, this report shows the spending plans and limits, the funding required to carry them out, and the limits on investing funds not immediately required. In particular, it is worth noting the current extent of internal borrowing, which is shown on page 23, standing at 19.17 million. This figure would otherwise have to be borrowed at a greater cost from sources outside the Council. So if I return to the recommendations and take them in the order in which they're set out in the policy, page 19, you can find the Treasury management strategy set out in front of you. 1.3 and 1.4 I've already mentioned to you. If you then go to page 21, you can see the approved minimum revenue provision statement. If you then go to page 20 and 21, the adopted capital Prudential Indicators, the tables are shown for you. And finally, the improvement of the investment strategy, which can be found on page 27, with the specified investments on page 28, the non-specified on page 27, and the non-specified on page 30. I think that the report is well laid out. You see it in slightly changed numbers, but virtually the same form annually. So I think I'll leave it there, Mr. Chairman, and if anybody has any questions, do my best to answer them.
Do we have a seconder before this? We ask questions. You have a seconder? Steve Ledden.
I'll second it.
Yeah, Tom Williams. I think he's on the audit. Thank you, Tom. Do you wish to speak now, Tom, or do you want to reserve?
No, I have nothing really to add to Councillor Studder Kennedy's excellent introduction and summary.
Right, thank you, Tom. Questions? Steve Light.
Thank you, Chair. I think we ought to record our thanks to the Audit Committee. It's not always the most popular committee for members to go on, but it does play a key role. And so I think we ought to take this opportunity to thank them for all the due diligence they do. And also, I also would ask the chair that what concerns, I think, many of us, if you look at the local government finance up and down the country, I think there's any one of a number, I think it's up to 15 now, that are teetering on bankruptcy or going under and being called in by the government. And I trust that the Audit Committee can attest that no way is Stroud anywhere near that. And in fact, it's been very well managed by councillors and the staff we have here. But I think in these dire times, it's important, I think, to give that assurance in public. So I wonder if the chair would possibly comment on that.
That's all right, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Lydon, for your kind comments. And yes, this council is in relative terms a very strong position financially. It has been very well managed over a number of years. And when I say a number, I'm thinking in tens. I can't say that we're at totally no risk at all, because as you will have understood, the pandemic has played havoc with various investments around the world. But at the moment, the position I would describe as relatively stable. There are strong reserves, and together with the grants that have come from central government, this council is in a fairly strong position. Hope that meets your requirements.
Thank you very much.
Simon, do you wish to speak? Do you wish to ask a question?
Yes, I do. I was just intrigued by table 14, investments maturing at the end of the current financial year. Dudley Metropolitan Council appears to be, and I may have got this completely wrong, giving us a rate of 1.45, which is very high. And I was just wondering how a local authority is managing to pay that back. Have I misunderstood that? That seems far higher than most savings. I wonder what they're doing. Can we learn anything from them if they're willing to lend money? So they must be making it from somewhere.
They're not lending us money. At the moment, the interest rates, that is exceptional. But the reason it stands out in that column, if I may continue, Mr. Chairman, is that none of the others below it, which are variables, have been shown. But the average is around 2.6, which makes everything else look slightly different if you put those figures in.
Okay, thank you, Nigel. Yes, that makes much more sense. I was just wondering where that was coming from. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? No more questions? We'll go to the debate. Any debate? Anyone wish to speak in debate? No? Okay, Nigel, do you wish to sum up then?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think it's already been stated that we are in a relatively strong position. The accounts team have done very well to produce the last set of accounts ready to go much earlier than the auditors were ready to receive them. And the Treasury management seems to have performed extremely well in difficult circumstances in the last 12 months. On behalf of the Audit Committee, I would therefore like to read the recommendations that we made on our meeting on the 26th of January, and it is as follows. 1, to adopt the Prudential Indicators and limits for 2021-22 to 2023-24. 2, to approve the Treasury Management Strategy 21-22 and the Treasury Prudential Indicators. 3, approve the Investment Strategy 21-22 and the detailed criteria for specified and non-specified investments, and approve the MRP statement 2021-22. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Nigel. Tom, did you wish to speak at all?
No, I'm quite happy with things as they are. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, we'll go to the vote. As usual, put your cursor next to the mic.
Councillor Baxendale.
4.
Sorry, Councillor Baxendale, I missed that. Was that 4?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Binns. 4. Councillor Braun.
4.
Councillor Brine.
4.
Councillor Clifton.
4.
Councillor Cooper.
4.
Councillor Cornell.
4.
Councillor Craig.
4.
Councillor Curley.
4.
Councillor Davis.
4.
Councillor Dewey.
4.
Councillor Edmonds.
4.
Councillor Fellows.
4.
Councillor Fryer.
4.
Councillor Green.
4.
Councillor Hall.
4.
Councillor Hurst.
4.
Councillor James.
4.
Councillor Job.
4.
Councillor Jones.
4.
Thank you. Councillor John Jones.
4.
Councillor Kay.
4.
Councillor Lydon.
4.
Councillor McEwen.
4.
Councillor Miles.
4.
Councillor Oxley.
4.
Councillor Pickering.
4.
Councillor Powell.
4.
Councillor Prenter.
4.
Councillor Rather.
4.
Councillor Reid.
4.
Councillor Robinson.
4.
Councillor Ross.
4.
Councillor Studdock Kennedy.
Get that. 4.
Thank you. Councillor Sutton.
4.
Councillor Tipper.
4.
Councillor Townley.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Tucker.
4.
Councillor Whiteside.
4.
Councillor Tim Williams.
4.
And Councillor Tom Williams.
4.
That's unanimous, Chair.
That's unanimous. Thank you, everyone. Move on now to 61, the Fair Pay and Senior Pay Policy Statement. Councillor Doyle will lead this. Thank you, Dinah.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I thought there was an echo. Hopefully my sound's okay. Yes, thank you, Chair. Obviously this has been to Strategy and Resources Committee and passed there. So this is the Senior Pay Policy for statement for 2021-2022. And as you'll be aware, of those of you familiar with this, that the council is required to have a pay policy statement for each financial year. And specifically, the statement must address the council's policy on remuneration of its chief officers for the subsequent financial year, and also to provide a definition of its lowest paid employees, state their remuneration, and make clear the relationship of pay between the lowest and highest paid groups of employees, which is in the report. Just to give you a headline on the report, which is quite short, so I hope you've all read it. The lowest paid employees are on the apprentice grade, and the highest paid employees is paid on Stroud 12. You can see that the ratio between the highest and lowest paid employees is calculated at 1 to 10. Government guidance is that ratio in the public sector should not exceed 1 to 20, so the council is well within these guidelines. And a comparison between Stroud 1, which is including the living wage, and Stroud 12 produces a ratio of 1 to 7, which is equally well within the guidelines. So by including the apprentices in it, that's what creates a slightly wider gap. The report details the current levels of remuneration for staff. The council pays spot salaries, and there are no bonuses, annual increments or performance-related payments. The biggest change in the data this year is the pay bandings in STR1 grade. Many of our apprentices have moved into the STR1 pay grade, as well as a number of people from the Pulse. And the final thing I need to point out, which has happened since we had the Strategy and Resources Committee meeting, is that the £95,000 exit cap is no longer, the cap no longer applies, as the Treasury has revoked that stipulation. So I guess we'll have to make sure that the statement is amended to reflect that. I'm happy to take any questions on that.
Do you have a seconder? Thank you, Martin. Right. Any questions? No? No questions? Okay, we're moving to debate. Any debate? No. We'll go to the voting then. Same as before. Cursor near you, Mike.
Councillor Baxendale.
4.
Councillor Binns. 4. Councillor Braun.
4.
Councillor Brine.
4.
Councillor Clifton.
4.
Councillor Cooper.
4.
Councillor Cornell.
4.
Councillor Craig.
4.
Councillor Curley.
4.
Councillor Davis.
4.
Councillor Dewey.
4.
Councillor Edmonds.
4.
Councillor Fellows.
Against.
Councillor Fryer.
4.
Councillor Green.
4.
Councillor Hall.
4.
Councillor Hurst.
4.
Councillor James.
4.
Councillor Job. 4. Councillor Hayden Jones.
4.
Councillor John Jones.
4.
Councillor Kay.
4.
Councillor Lydon.
4.
Councillor McEwen.
4.
Councillor Miles.
4.
Councillor Oxley.
4.
Councillor Pickering.
4.
Councillor Powell.
4.
Councillor Prenter.
4.
Councillor Rather.
4.
Councillor Reid.
4.
Councillor Robinson.
4.
Councillor Ross.
4.
Councillor Studd Kennedy.
Abstain.
Sorry, Councillor Studd Kennedy.
Repeat that. Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Sutton.
4.
Councillor Tipper.
4.
Councillor Townley. Sorry, Councillor Townley, can you repeat that?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Tucker.
4.
Councillor Whiteside.
4.
Councillor Williams.
4.
Councillor Tom Williams.
4.
Okay, so that's 39 votes for, 1 against and 1 abstention.
39 votes for. 1 abstention, 1 against. Thank you. Okay. Right, we'll move on now to Council Tax Support Scheme. Councillor Cornwell will present. Join up.
Yep, thank you. Chair. So again, this is information from Strategy and Resources. Can you just check people have got their microphones muted, because there's quite a strange echo when, yeah, that sounds better. Okay, very good. Yes, so as I said, this came through the Strategy and Resources Committee, and the recommendation is to approve. Oh, we're on capital strategy, sorry. I'm doing council tax support now, aren't I? Yes, okay, that's all right. Sorry, it was on the screen. Don't confuse me. Yes, so that this is recommending that we keep the current scheme of 2021-22. Just as a reminder of the background to this paper, that council tax benefit was abolished in 2013 as part of the welfare reform changes, with the government reducing the funding available for council tax support, and each year the council has to decide how it will administer council tax support and develop a scheme for working age people. Since 2013, the council has adopted the government's default scheme, which has meant no changes or reduction in the support we provide. By doing this, we continue to provide up to a maximum of 100% support, protecting the most vulnerable residents in the district. And a report before this, the Strategy and Resources Committee in 2019 recommended we did explore alternative schemes and carry out some modelling of our claimants to be sure that we were getting the right intelligence and making sure support went where it was most needed. But unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we haven't been able to have that work carried out to any useful degree, nor was it felt appropriate to reduce the support we provide. And I should say that the team under Simon Killing's leadership has been working extremely hard through this whole last year. They've had a large workload because they've been basically responsible for allocating all the business grants out to the community. And so it's quite understandable they've had to put this work on hold. And I think we're very grateful for them for the work that they have been doing in allocating the funding out to local businesses. And just to mark the effect that has happened as a result of the pandemic, that the working age caseload did increase by around 16% at the start of the pandemic. Around April time, we've seen quite a spike. Interestingly enough, those figures have remained stable for the major part of the year, while the government continues to provide support, both through the furlough and self-employed income support schemes. But obviously those schemes will come to an end in the not too distant future. So there's a concern we may see a further impact on the sorts of people who might fall into a bracket where they need support who otherwise wouldn't have needed to previously. And there's also some information, an information pack you should have in the documents there, which provides further support through the council tax hardship scheme. And so really what we do try to do is ensure that anyone who really is struggling will be able to access some form of support, which, as you can imagine, is extremely valuable. To reduce any cost to the council of the scheme, we'd have to make changes to the level of support provided to working age claimants, and there is a need to modernise and make changes to the current scheme so that it works more effectively in sort of response to the changes being made at a national level with universal credit. So the report is recommending that we keep the existing scheme for 2021 to 22, which allows the council to continue to provide a maximum of 100% support while protecting the most vulnerable residents in the district. And the wider introduction of universal credit will impact on how council tax support is administered, as will the pandemic. So consideration should be given to alternative schemes for future years. So the intention is, if the workload allows the team to do so, that during the coming year, a full review and modelling will be carried out and new proposals brought to the council for consideration if the scheme is to be changed for 22-23. And obviously any future scheme would need to provide protection for the most vulnerable claimants, as well as aim to be cost neutral. Happy to take any questions on that, Chair.
Do you have a seconder?
I'll second, Chair.
Thank you, Colin. Any questions? Steve Lydon.
Yes, thank you, Leader. And I understand, or I trust we will get all party support for this. Can you tell me what the other districts are doing on this scheme in the county? Because if my memory takes me back, it used to be a joint scheme with all the other districts. That's one question. And part two, as and when later in the year, as we expect the economic crash will continue and the effects of the pandemic and furlough, as you mentioned, will we be reviewing how and what we do with this critical support scheme? I trust it will be, of course, subject to what we can afford, because it is a critical scheme. And despite what a lot of people think, I think the vast majority of people, the majority of people who get it are actually in work. So I'd appreciate some clarity on that.
Thank you. Yes, we're the only council in Gloucestershire, in fact, one of the few in the country, who still continues to provide this scheme as it is. So I don't actually have the breakdown of how each one does it, but other councils, and it wasn't in this paper, though I know it's been in a paper that's previously come to the committee, and so they do sort of more of a banding system, so it reduces down according to sort of different criteria. So it is a bit different, and there is probably the overall thing I would say is it tends to mean people don't get as much support as they would have done on the scheme that we have. So no one is doing the scheme quite as we are anymore. And on the question around looking forwards, yeah, I did ask, I can't recall if I asked at the Strategy and Resources Committee, but I certainly asked the officers about this, as I made my point in the introduction. There may be some quite critical points coming up in the year. It's really unclear as to what will happen when furlough ends. And so what would we do if we saw a big increase in claimants? I said that with 16% has remained quite stable, but there are a lot of held by furlough right now. And so that's a piece of uncertainty. And I think, as with everything with the pandemic, we need to be ready to respond as a council if things reach a significant point, and we need to really support a lot more people.
Okay, Any more questions? No? Trevor, I should have asked you, do you wish to speak now or do you want to wait to the end of the debate?
Sorry, who were you asking, Chair?
Oh, sorry, Colin. I knew it was wrong.
Thanks.
Do you wish to speak now or do you want to wait to the end of
I'll speak now if I can, Chair.
we're going to
It costs a lot of money, 6.7 million annual cost. To me, it's important to help our residents who are finding financial hardship, and in a lot of cases, it's through no fault of their own, especially in the current situation and with furlough. And the worry is when furlough ends, I can only see it going up. So I think it is important. It shows that we are a caring council. We care about our residents. So I really hope that everyone will support this paper. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Any debate? Steve Davis.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to say, I think this is not the time to change this scheme. We were all agreed previously on last year that we would look into this. Obviously, with the pandemic, that hasn't been possible. And obviously, with the pandemic, it wouldn't be the right time to do so. And, you know, the question mark will come whether our problems, you know, I suspect, like many, that they will get worse before they get better, but it is not at all clear at this point how much worse or for how long before we see a recovery. So I think this is not the time to change things, and therefore we'll be supporting this.
Thank you, Stephen. Any other debate? No? We'll go to the vote then. Cursors near. Oh, sorry, Doreen, now you wish to speak, don't you?
Just very briefly, I mean, I think Colin said it very eloquently about shows that we do care as a council. And, you know, I think the point is, let's leave it as it is for this coming year. We'll look at it through the year, but it's absolutely essential that we continue to provide this support for people, because many people really makes a massive difference. So I'm really pleased that we're keeping this going. It's the people it reaches, it really can make a huge difference to their lives.
Thank you, Doreen. We're going into the vote now then.
Councillor Baxendale.
For.
Councillor Binns. For. Councillor Braun.
For.
Councillor Brine.
For.
Councillor Clifton.
For.
Councillor Cooper.
For.
Councillor Cornell.
For.
Councillor Craig.
For.
Councillor Curley.
For.
Councillor Davis.
For.
Councillor Dewey.
For.
Councillor Edmonds.
For.
Councillor Fellows.
For.
Councillor Fryer.
For.
Councillor Green.
For.
Councillor Hall.
For.
Councillor Hurst. Councillor Nickhurst.
For.
Councillor James.
For.
Councillor Job.
For.
Councillor Jones.
For.
Councillor John Jones.
For.
Councillor Kay.
For.
Councillor Lydon.
For.
Councillor McEwen.
For.
Councillor Miles. Councillor Jenny Miles. Councillor Jenny Miles. I'll come back in a moment. Councillor Oxley.
For.
Councillor Pickering.
For.
Councillor Powell.
For.
Councillor Prenter.
For.
Councillor Rather.
For.
Councillor Reid.
For.
Councillor Robinson.
For.
Councillor Ross.
For.
Councillor Studdock Kennedy.
For.
Councillor Sutton.
For.
Councillor Tipper.
For.
Councillor Townley.
For.
Councillor Tucker.
For.
Councillor Whiteside.
For.
Councillor Tim Williams.
4.
Councillor Tom Williams.
4.
Councillor Jenny Miles.
4.
Thank you. That's unanimous, Chair.
Right, thank you. That's unanimous. I'll be picking up. Right, then we move on to 6B3, Strategy and Resources Committee. This is again you doing it. Capital strategy.
Yes, unfortunately, me again. So this again went through the Strategy and Resources Committee, and we're recommending it to the council to approve it. If you recall, a little bit of background to this is that back in 2018, SIPFA required that every local authority would produce a capital strategy and keep it under review. And so just to recall what this capital strategy does as a document, it sets out the principles of putting together a capital programme, how capital is financed, how the council approaches and manages the risks relating to capital. The capital strategy obviously is looked at every year, and the only significant change that I want to point your attention to in this year's update is regarding the rules around access to the Public Works Loans Board borrowing. And if you refer to, I'm not sure what is on the council, it's page 44 on my pack, which is from the Strategy and Resources papers, which is in the strategy. If you bear with me a moment, I'll tell you. It is at it's under as a prudential borrowing, which is yeah, and the change there is that paragraph which relates to from November 2020, access to the PWLB was prohibited for any local authority with plans in their 3-year capital programme for purchase of assets for yield. This has resulted in general fund borrowing rates reducing by 1%. However, it limits the scope of action for the council to invest again as set out in parts of the strategy. And so this relates to the fact it's a change that's been made probably in response to other councils other than ourselves, where the government was concerned around a lot of borrowing simply for rather for income gain and not for other reasons. And where that change impacts on us is if you look on page principle 3 of the capital strategy page, which states that sorry, bear with me a minute. Which is that the council will consider schemes purely to generate a commercial return as part of the budget strategy to close the gap between expenditure and resources. So it means if this council wanted to do anything using that principle, they wouldn't be able to use funds from the Public Works Loans Board. But as you know, it does actually just say purely for a commercial return, and this council doesn't have a track record of simply making decisions on that basis. The council's net borrowing is just in excess of £20 million as it's planned in the current capital programme. It doesn't actually at this juncture consider schemes purely for yield, and it's important, as I've already said, to note that the council has never implemented a capital project purely for yield. It's always really been for other reasons as well, as mentioned in those principles, to benefit our district. But it should be noted that it doesn't preclude capital projects that deliver a yield, so as long as those schemes also deliver on council priorities. If by any chance the council wanted to borrow in order to simply for an income, it would have to find other financial ways of doing that. So really that is sort of in sum the significant change that we have since last year. Otherwise the capital strategy is basically the same, and as I referred to those principles, I think they're very good principles which really reflect very accurately the values of this council. And we come to the budget later on, you'll see it's reflected in what we're recommending to council to adopt for the coming year. But happy to take any questions on that, Chair.
Good morning. Any questions? No. Right, we're going to move into debate. You have a seconder? Simon Pickering. Thank you, Simon. Do you wish to speak now?
I'll leave it to the end of the debate, if there is a debate.
Okay, debate then. Anyone wishes to join the debate? Anybody? No. You want to speak now then, Simon?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think it's important that we approve the capital strategy. The use of our capital resources and borrowing capital is an important aspect of local authorities. And as Donna has pointed out, it's important that we do that in line with our policies and not just to make a return. I think it's also very clear that there may be opportunities in the future to borrow money aligned with our policies that say in the future, if we wanted to borrow money to invest in to address our carbon neutral aspects, investing in a solar farm or a battery storage system or even a wind farm, as long as it's in line with our policies and it may even bring a return. I know counties like Wiltshire have invested large amounts in solar farms and are making a decent return on that. So it's something that we can look at that in the future. And I encourage all members to support the capital strategy.
Doina, do you want to sum up now?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm just basically happy. I think Simon said it very well. So I think it's really good that we have this strategy in place. For a while as a council, we didn't, which meant that we didn't have that clarity around the framework within which we wanted our capital programme to be held. So very happy to commend this to the council and obviously noting that difference, which, as I said, doesn't have a major impact on us, but obviously it's good to reflect on what the current situation is.
Thank you, Doina. We'll now go to the vote then.
Councillor Baxendale.
For.
Councillor Binns.
For.
Councillor Braun.
For.
Councillor Bryan.
For.
Councillor Clifton.
For.
Councillor Cooper.
For.
Councillor Cornell.
For.
Councillor Craig.
For.
Councillor Curley.
For.
Councillor Davis.
For.
Councillor Denny. Oh, sorry, apologies, Denny, you joined late.
No, I'm here. For.
Councillor Dewey.
For.
Councillor Edmonds.
For.
Councillor Fellows.
For.
Councillor Fryer.
For.
Councillor Green.
For.
Councillor Hall.
For.
Councillor Hurst.
For.
Councillor James.
For.
Councillor Job. For. Councillor Jones.
For.
Councillor John Jones.
For.
Councillor Kay.
For.
Councillor Lydon.
For.
Councillor McEwen.
For.
Councillor Miles.
For.
Councillor Oxley.
For.
Councillor Pickering.
For.
Councillor Powell.
For.
Councillor Prenter.
For.
Councillor Rather.
Against.
Councillor Reid.
For.
Councillor Robinson.
For.
Councillor Ross.
For.
Councillor Stella Kennedy.
For.
Councillor Sutton.
For.
Councillor Tipper.
For.
Councillor Townley.
For.
Councillor Tucker.
For.
Councillor Whiteside.
For.
Councillor Tim Williams.
For.
Councillor Tom Williams.
For.
39 votes for and 1 against.
39 for, sorry, 39 votes for and 1 against. Thank you. Now we move on to 6B4. Capital Programme and Medium Term Financial Plan and Council Tax Charges. Councillor Cornell. Doina, you're up.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, this is a very substantial report, and so I hope you'll beg my indulgence when I just go through the key headlines of it, because it is important that we understand what's all involved, and obviously there's quite a lot of decisions there to be made. So again, this is a recommendation from the Strategy and Resources Committee to Council. So this report is setting out the medium-term financial plan and the budgets for the medium term. And it's divided into various sections, and I'll just go through those in turn just so it's clear, and obviously we'll be very happy to take any questions at the end. I do obviously have officers to hand if there's any particular technical questions that that you'd like answering. Just some introductory comments first of all. So since we had the Strategy and Resources Committee, we now have the final settlement has been agreed by Parliament, which gives us some certainty on funding for the coming year. The Fair Funding Review, which we've talked about quite a few times, was originally expected to impact in this year, has been further delayed into 2022-23. And this is the plan for that is to remove business rates growth, which is worth about £1.4 million a year from the council. And so the medium term plan has been prepared on the basis that that will go ahead. As you'll be aware, the pandemic continues to have a major impact on the finances of the council. We have received further grant support of just under £100,000, £978,000, which is expected from the government. But this only partially covers the expected impact of £1.5 million. And obviously that figure was arrived at before we went into the latest lockdown. And I have asked the Section 1.5 officer if there's any amendment to that, but pretty much that 1.51 million impact projected ahead is pretty much still where we think we are as a council. A small reduction in business rates has been budgeted for next year, but levels collected may be higher or lower, depending obviously on the overall performance of the economy. New homes bonus funding, which is one of the main funding we still get from government, has declined again, not as much as we anticipated. And the government has just launched a consultation on a potential future replacement for the scheme. It's not clear at the moment what the funding for us would be at this stage, so some uncertainty for the future. You will see in the Appendix C, we've had the Cross-Party Recovery Board, which has been reporting regularly to Strategy and Resources, and some of the work also goes back to other committees as well. And we are making a number of additions to the budget, which are highlighted in Appendix C, and these include a whole range of different aspects around regeneration, retrofit and community hubs. I should say that these aren't exactly growth items because they're funded from reserves which have already been specifically allocated for those projects and don't add to the long-term expenditure of the council. But what we've done is that instead of just allocating a ballpark figure, we're actually allocating some specific, we're allocating those resources quite specifically to move forward on some of our priorities. There's also the capital programme, which includes significant environmental projects and new homes. And of course, there's all the details there around the council tax from our town and parishes councils, which is in the detailed appendix to the report. Just to go through quickly some of the funding. So obviously what's important to note is on council tax, we are proposing the same as last year, a council tax increase of £5 for the year, which is a 2.4% increase. And that amounts to about just under, I think, 10p a week increase for Band D property. And we're also proposing a small reduction in business rates. The baseline expected rates are expected to be reset for the coming year, which means we would lose all our growth above our current funding baseline, which is around 2.4 million at present. So we're expecting to see quite a significant drop in our retained business rates in 21-22. And as I mentioned about new homes bonus, we do have certainty that we're going to receive £880,000, which is somewhat more than we anticipated in the budget strategy, but it's still a third down on what we had the previous financial year. Bearing in mind what I said about the impact of the pandemic, it means again our funding is being reduced year on year. So as I was saying previously, the pandemic will continue to have an impact on our finances throughout the coming year, and the council has been really active in responding to these challenges. And obviously the Section 151 officer and his team has been working across the council and with group leaders to ensure money is allocated where needed. And this will continue throughout the coming year. And I just have to say a huge thank you to the team, as with all our officers working under challenging circumstances at home, some of them having to do homeschooling. I imagine trying to prepare a budget report and homeschooling is quite a challenge. So we're very grateful for them working under these circumstances. And I must stress that again, even more so than last year, the situation is still extremely uncertain, more uncertain than we've ever seen before because of the pandemic. And so councils are asked to note the uncertainty, which is C, you can see there on the decision box. Around adjustments, so that's section 3, you'll see that there's been quite a reassessment of that, and a few things to point out that have been done is around inflation, which you can see reflected in the comments there about, sorry, the the notes there about pay and contracts. Also, we've made an allowance of 1% for salaries, as the Chancellor has indicated. For areas under central government control, there'll be a pay freeze except for lower grades of pay. However, this doesn't directly impact local government, which is under a slightly different set of regulations, but it does give us a context for that and for the negotiations which are going on currently. Good news is around the budgeting with Ubico, which some years ago was quite a major pressure on the council's finances, and that is really in much improved circumstances now, and you can see the adjustments in the report. There's a small underspend expected, but the financial performance of the contract is strong. And obviously the Environment Committee has just agreed to renew the contract there. So we're really seeing good value for money for that contract and also providing exemplar service. And as I mentioned, the recovery items which are covered in Appendix C, and just a few small pressures on existing services that I'll just highlight. One is around the loss of income from investments, obviously because we've seen a major decrease in interest rates. And also we've got some additional costs around temporary accommodation, which is £153,000. Moving on to section 4, which is the medium-term financial plan, which sets out the position for the reserves. We're making an assumption that the end of the MTFP will have a budget gap of 1.269 million. And as I said before about the delayed introduction of the business rates reset, we're expecting to have a surplus position which we put into the rates reset reserve, which gives us a bit of a cushion on the impact for the council. And then obviously if there is any increase or decrease in rates income in the coming year, that'll be used to adjust the level of this the reserves transfer. And you can look at Appendix D, where you can see full details of the council's reserves and the balance. And finally, section 5 gives you all the details on the capital programme. And you can see there the New Homes Build programme, which will be also addressed in the next item, which is around the housing revenue account, which has been included at a budget of £31 million. And we saw at Strategy and Resources that, you know, we already covered that that item. And that is on the back of obviously significant investment through the last few years into our new homes building programme. And the budget is set at a level which we feel can be delivered. So we did deliver the budget, the new homes programme that we'd set previously on time and on budget. So we're continuing to work on those premises. And of course, there may be some fluctuations over the year, but overall, we believe that programme is achievable, even given the restrictions that we're currently under. And there's also, you can see some detail around the Green Homes grant there, extremely successful in winning external funding for that. The water source heat pumps previously agreed by the council. And obviously, we've also got some extra funding around cycling infrastructure. And canal restoration, again, one of our great schemes that's progressing. And Brimston Port, we're very pleased to see that the planning committee approved the plans for the infrastructure just on the planning committee approved the plans with just a condition that we've got a small issue to sort out with Natural England around the fish, which hopefully will be resolved. So that was delegated to officers to resolve that. But otherwise, that's a very positive step towards that long-term plan and that project. So we'll hopefully see that coming forward over the next year. So there's a lot of detail there, but I'll stop in a minute, but I'll just mention one thing, which is a change since we brought the papers to Strategy and Resources, was around the Kickstart programme. As you'll see, we've allocated funding for one officer. And unfortunately, there was a lot of changes at the very last minute. And Amy Beckett, our officer, was working really hard to register the council as a Kickstart organisation, working extremely closely with the county council, who were very, very supportive of our application. Unfortunately, the goalpost changed, really quite unfortunately, at the last minute. And so we weren't able to get our application in. We had it in on the original timetable. But so having had a discussion with Andrew, our finance officer, and also Mark Russell and Amy Beckett, who lead on this, we've just left it as it is for the moment, because we are still doing a lot of work to see how we can still be part of that scheme, or if we partner with the county council. But even if we aren't able to do that, we'll still be very much supporting a Kickstart, supportive of making sure we can reach young people and get them into work. And as with all the recovery items, they have to respond to the pandemic and changing circumstances. So I propose that we bring that back to Strategy and Resources as it becomes clearer where we are going with that particular scheme. And as it is funded through the business rates pilot reserve, that does give that flexibility to look if that's right, or if we need to reallocate it for some other support for the local economy. And that is for all the recovery items. There are proposals to go forwards, but as with everything, there can be some response as circumstances change, and it's good to have that flexibility as priorities rise up and other things become less important. So we have that flexibility there. And I'm very happy to take any questions. I know there's a lot of detail in that report, Chair.
Thank you, Donia. Are there any questions? Stephen Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered if you had a figure in your mind, Leader, as to how much money is in this budget to address the climate emergency we declared 2 years ago. Thanks.
I haven't totaled it up, but if you look across the budget, it comes to some millions, because it depends where we start and where we begin. So I can just give you a few examples. We've got the external funding that we've awarded. We've got £2 million that's come in to insulate through the Green Homes grant, which is particularly focusing on those people most at risk from poorly heated and insulated homes. We've got the investment in the water source heat pumps. We've got investment in the recovery plan around putting extra resources in officers to lead on retrofit in our council homes and also in the private sector. We've got investment in cycling, and we've got so obviously that's looking to reduce the carbon emissions through transport, which is not as transport body. It's good that we can also have an impact there. And we have obviously, we mustn't also forget around the investment in the natural environment as well. So those are a few examples. I mean, if I went through it all, I could add it all up. But I think through the years, this council has invested millions across that whole spectrum of different things. We've been investing in carbon management for some years now, and we continue to do so. So I can't give you a ballpark figure, but if you added it all up, you'd find there's several millions in there in all these different aspects of things that we actually can have a direct impact on.
Do you have another question, Stephen?
No, thank you, Chair.
No, anyone else? Any more? No? No? Do we have a seconder for this, Doina? Norman, was you putting your hand up for a question, or was you seconding this?
Yes.
Yes, right. Do you wish to speak now, or do you wish to speak?
No, thanks, Chair. Later on, perhaps.
Okay, we're going to debate then. Any debate? Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. And I do want to start off by thanking the officers for putting this budget together. I echo what the leader said, and this must have been done in incredibly difficult times. And I too can't imagine having to homeschool and write a budget report. I have to say, there's nothing wrong with this budget, but equally there's little exciting about this budget. I think it's unambitious, and as a consequence, we won't be voting against it, but we will be abstaining as we did at Strategy and Resources. And I'd just sort of like to explain that decision. Basically, the council finances are in good shape. We have done very well out of grants from the government to cover our expenditure on COVID. We had a better settlement, everybody would accept that, than we expected looking forward. And I'll tell you how good it has been, actually. Over the last 5 years of this council, we have put 3 million, nearly just shy of £3 million into our reserves. Actually, we've only dipped into our reserves 1 year in the last 5. So any suggestion, and I'm sure we will have it from some people on this council, that, oh, it's tough times and the government has starved us of money, is not true. My concern and the reason behind my question for climate change is I wouldn't deny we are doing things for climate change, but one of them is an officer. One of them is the heat pumps, which we all voted for and think is a good idea. But the money being spent on park homes came from the government. We made the grant, which is great that we did that. We were successful, and we are now spending that money. So it's not truly actually Stroud District Council money that we're addressing. And I wonder if we missed a trick in either putting in a bigger amount for tackling climate change, or, and I know this was suggested to the Recovery Board last week, that we allocated that every committee had an amount that they could use to address climate change when they made decisions. And I give the example which we've had before, the number of diesel vehicles that we bought when we took in to do our repair services in-house. If we had allocated a bit more budget, could we have been more creative? Could we have actually addressed the climate issues around that purchase? So I think we are showing a distinct lack of ambition when addressing climate change 2 years after declaring it as an emergency. Maybe there is a different definition of emergency than the one that I understand. And I'd make one other small point, which only dawned on me when one of our members brought this to my attention. We have just across the board increased all of our fees in line with inflation. That sounds reasonable enough at first pass, but it does beg the question, what are we doing to try and create efficiencies, which would mean we didn't have to always add an inflation-based increase on all of our fees and costs, and therefore allowing less cost to the residents of Stroud District. So I do feel that we're not doing enough to save money. We have money that we can do things with, but we don't seem to have any plans to do that. But obviously there are some fantastic things and programs, Grimscombe Port, the canal regeneration. There's much that is good in this, but I just find it lacking in ambition. Thank you, Chair.
Nick Hurst.
Thank you, Chair. I likewise will be abstaining, but for slightly different reasons. I was brought up in a Victorian household where if you couldn't afford something, you didn't spend the cash. And I recognise that councils are different to private households insofar as there are statutory requirements to meet and expectations which are enshrined. All of our ratepayers are facing significant cost pressures because of pandemic, and I don't think it's the right time to be putting up the rates, frankly. But I recognise that that's perhaps an inevitability. However, on a very, very small point, in Appendix C on page 83. There is, this is just a small item relative to the capital spends, but there's £60,000 in there for a canal strategy, which I think is absolutely premature. The work which is going on down at the western end with the lottery grants and everything else hasn't matured, hasn't been worked into the system. We've got Brimscombe Port at the other end as well, which members will know I'm very, very involved in. And I think it's the wrong time to be spending £60,000 on a strategy when you haven't even actually got the canal in place yet to actually see why that money should be allocated. We have enough experience amongst our officers to know where good practice might mature, and I just just as I say, it is a very small amount of money, £60,000 within this overall budget, but it's a kind of an indication of the sort of things that I think we should not be doing at this time because of cost pressures on our ratepayers.
Trevor Hall.
Be supporting this budget, and I find it quite galling really to hear Stephen Davis say that it's a lack of ambition when I haven't been a member of this council for very long, but I've taken a lot of interest in local government over many years, and I can remember before the present administration was leading this council when all we ever got was saying we have to plead caution, we have to have caution, and any kind of projects that was suggested for the betterment of local people, the Tories always used to say we have to plead caution, and the cuts that we've had from national government over the time, and I find it quite galling that we're being told that we're not ambitious enough. I just despair, to be perfectly honest. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. Steve Lydon.
Well, building on the theme which my good friend Councillor Hall has started, I find it a sheer irony. We've been lectured by the leader of the Conservative group. His government has given some money out in a disorganised pots way with no coherence to it, often late, with all sorts of strings attached to it. And in fact, the way they handled the pandemic is exactly the same. Government make announcements and then people scrabble around. And I agree with him totally about thanking the officers. We scrabble around, just like we're doing for the election, to wait for the decisions to come further down the line. So, and in terms of lack of ambition, well, actually, I think we do quite a lot. We're a small district council. The other thing it's worth remembering, of course, is that in terms of the pecking order of where the rate rises come, or the council tax comes from, Police and Crime Commissioner first, then the county, and then us. Ironically, his own county council are putting up the council tax more than we are. And that's great, isn't it? That's a good example of a well-organised county, which I won't go on about what various parts are in special measures, etc. So I also think that earlier on we had the chair of our audit committee, who's certainly not the same party as me, saying that we actually are well run and it's right and proper to have good reserves. If you look up and down the country, what other Conservative councils accuse Labour of being is profligate, overspending, wasting the council taxpayers' money. So I take it as a bit of a compliment that he thinks we're doing well here. So let's not take any truck with this nonsense about lack of ambition. All of us want to build more houses. All of us want to do better things. None of us come on a council to do bad things. However, unless that government takes its fetters off and gives us more powers and more ways to do things, we're caught in this horrendous trap here. So I commend this budget, everybody. And the very last point is all of us, certainly in the Alliance, do take this seriously. We did go through every item and look at, was it worth doing? Which is the way to go? What is the right percentage to put it up by? And it's with a heavy heart we do it. And there's no doubt about it. None of us like to put this out there. But it's important that the vital services that we supply, like the council tax scheme, like supporting some of the credit issues, the capital issues, do continue. So I commend this budget to you, and I trust that others will see this as a good budget.
Thank you, Steve. Now, Norman, you had your hand up and you took it down. Do you not wish to speak now then?
Yes, please, Chair. I'm particularly proud of being a councillor on Stroud District Council because we still build houses for rent. If you look at paragraph 510 of the report, you can see us affirming that the provision of new housing remains one of our priorities. And if we were only, as Councillor Lydon pointed out, if we were only given more funds by central government, we would build many, many more houses. Our waiting list is so long that we desperately would welcome the opportunity to build more housing. This is a good budget and it deserves our support. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would urge everybody to support this budget. I think just picking up on something that Nick Hurst said that all our residents are suffering. That's not true. The pandemic is incredibly diversive in its effects on households. Some households are suffering terribly. We've seen the rise in the people using food banks, people out of work, unable to pay their bills, losing their jobs. But at the same time, large numbers of people are saving large amounts of money. You may have heard the governor of the Bank of England saying just the other week that there's 125 increase in 125 billion in private savings over the last year. So it is incredibly diversive. But some people are not doing so badly, and I think that's something we need to remember. I'm also just going to pick up on the canal point that was made. It's the canal corridor study. It's not the water. It's not just the towpath. One of the key things about that is having a strategic plan for that corridor, and ensuring that we do have oven-ready, shovel-ready projects in the future linked to the canal development that can bring inward investment. And it's that strategic thinking that I'm sure Nick's heard me go on and on about, that we need this strategic thinking, and it is beyond the water. I think that's really important. I must say I was very pleased to hear Stephen Davis's speech about the budget. I noted that he said more positive things than negative things about the budget, and I take that as a compliment to the administration, and I'm sure some of us will be sending him application forms to join our parties for the next year. And that's absolutely great, Stephen. However, I do share your frustration in the lack of sometimes progress on moving to a carbon zero economy, and I think it's something really important. But we do need to, and I've got lots of ideas of what we could be doing and what we should be doing, but we do need to get those foundations in place. It's that cathedral building philosophy that we need. We need to spend the money at the right time on the right things and get those foundations there. As Greta Thunberg says, we build the foundations. We don't actually know what colour the roof will be or how it will be finished, but it's getting those foundations right. And clearly, you know, as I circulated to all members, there are opportunities coming up. Transition Stroud's got this idea of a EV car share scheme that may come forward. It may be something the district council is involved in, but also obviously retrofit of both our private homes and our council housing and the private sector are key areas. And it's really important that we are appointing those officers to give that technical support and guidance to build those reports, so to use the money we have very wisely in the coming years. And I thoroughly recommend this budget, and I hope that all members will vote for it, particularly Stephen.
Thank you, Simon. Brian Tipper.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering what the term retrofit means. And I'm wondering whether it, in regard with the garages, things like the kitchens, front doors, bathrooms that were fitted in recent years. And I still remember the complaints from tenants that work was being done that wasn't needed. Front doors weren't needed to be replaced. Some bathrooms didn't need to be replaced. Some kitchens didn't need to be replaced. They were complaining that they were being inconvenienced by the instalment of something new. But all I'm trying to say is that I just hope that with that term retrofit, the money is well spent. I just hope that the budgets that have been laid down are spent, and they're not just a catch penny for anything else. And just to make sure that, our tenants, in other words, the users and the ratepayers, are well served, and the money is well spent. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Brian. Paul Denny.
Yeah, I've got quite a long memory, and one of the things I remember when we came to power in this council was the fact that we found huge amounts of money stuffed down the back of the sofa, money that had not been spent. I think since then we've done pretty well, actually, and I just wanted to applaud the officers for the work they've done on this budget. The work that I do is taking forever at the moment, because all of the research facilities and laboratories and everything I work with are under huge restrictions, and everything is taking much, much longer to do. And in fact, some things have stopped altogether. So to have got the budget put together and got it out in the time that they have, I think is really excellent. So that was really all I wanted to say. I'll be supporting this budget tonight. Yeah, we would all love to be more ambitious. We always would, but you need money to do stuff. Basically, from where I now live, I can see 2 wind farms from my kitchen window. Stroud has 2 wind turbines, I think, of any large size. I think Simon might be able to confirm that. And that's because of a decision that was taken by a Conservative government who decided that onshore wind was not required or not liked by their voters. So if we're talking about ambition in the environment, I think it's a bit rich that the Conservatives are trying to lecture us on that, because I think you'll find all the movement in recent years has not come from that side of the chamber. Anyway, that was all I was going to say. So I'll be supporting this budget tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Chris?
Yeah, again, thank you, Chair. I certainly am going to be supporting this budget. I can remember, I'm not Victorian, I can't go back that far, Nick, but what I can remember is when we had a Conservative administration, a cabinet system who wanted to sell off our housing stock. That's ambition. We now went into a committee system. That is ambition. That's allowing members, all members, to have an input into the way this council is run. Not to criticise, not to say we're not ambitious, but to have an input. And that's what committees do. And I don't think there's any suggestion that any member made towards this budget which was not considered. So to sit there and say we're not ambitious, I'd like to know what the Conservative members wanted in our budget, because I didn't hear it, and I don't think our officers did either. You know, so when you talk about being ambitious, we haven't been ambitious. Tell us why. Tell us what we're not doing. Don't just tell us we're not ambitious. We need to know how to move forward, not just to criticise. It's easy to sit back and criticise. This administration has involved all members through the committee systems on all aspects of this budget. None of it's been done behind closed doors. And to suddenly say at the budget meeting we're not ambitious enough, well, I put it back to you. You know, you are part of this council. Where was your contribution? Thank you.
Okay, there's no more debate then, so we're going to go to the vote. Mike's ready.
Can I speak, Chair, before we go to the vote?
And Chair, I've had my hand up for quite a while.
Oh, my colleague here hasn't informed me of that. Sorry, Skeena. It's okay. You can go ahead and speak.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Chair. So I really appreciate how much work has gone in under the conditions that it's gone in. And I also appreciate the argument of the limitations, and what Chris has just said makes sense, that, you know, when we offer critique and we don't offer what we want and what we need, it's not very useful. So thank you, Chris, for reminding me of that. I suppose I just wonder what our young people would make of this budget in the light of a climate emergency. And again, with respect for the constraints and with respect for the fact that we do have a voice, and sometimes I don't use it, and I can own that. I still have a heart sink. I still feel very sad to know that we haven't been. It's not ambition, it's imagination, I think, and I think I've seen it in some of the equalities committee work that's going on that Rachel is leading, where we've been thinking about citizens panels, and that for me is something that when we think about baking in climate resilience for our community, that I think we could have thought about putting together some resources for, you know, we're doing it at a national level as in terms of citizens assembly. We're even doing it at a global level. It's being talked about for a global citizens assembly. Why can't we do imaginative and really probably very powerful things for all of us, so that we can share resources, so it's not all up to council to solve the climate emergency problems, because actually this council can't do that on its own, especially without the support of national government. So I really think something that we can start thinking about, that I would wish us to start thinking about, is how we reach out to our community and create citizen-led power that can address the enormous climate issues that we are facing, and that we can build some climate resilience in that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Skeena. Norman, did you?
Yes, sir. The Equalities Working Party, of which Skeena is a member, met today. And unfortunately, Skeena wasn't able to attend. And I only think that Skeena has been able to attend one of its meetings since we got going, which is unfortunate, but that's quite an interesting idea of hers, about citizens panels. So I'm looking forward to her actually attending our next meeting and coming up with some suggestions on how we can move forward on that.
Right. Yeah. Doina, you're going to sum up now.
Thank you, Chair. I should be delighted to sum up, and really interesting to hear all the views. I think I'd just like to remind councillors of how we had a corporate peer review, and one of the things that came out of that very strongly a couple of years ago was that we needed to invest in strategic leadership. And it's incredible when you look back over this pandemic year, when some of our team just joined us right just when we went into lockdown, and how challenging that's been for them. But if you cast your eye and you go and look through the line by line detail of what you'll see there in the proposals around the recovery, that's very much taking that on board. And I think Simon has responded to the issue around the canal strategy, how we see that as a really important step. In order to have ambition and make big asks, you have to know what you're asking for. And in order to ask for something that you want to get, you need to do the groundwork. And you're competing against many, many other councils who are doing exactly the same thing as you. I just want to commend this budget to you. It takes into account the declining funds we've had from government over the long term after a decade of cuts to the public sector. We've seen obviously the recent impact of COVID-19 for ourselves and also for our district. And yes, we are proposing to increase council tax, but also really positive decisions we're making around allocating specific resources to key priorities in our plan. I think as an administration, we have a particular character, and we've always been very sensible, and we've kept investing in our communities. And I think that's been a slow burn, which has paid off in the long term, not a quick fix. And what we've seen is that we were more resilient, I think, to this pandemic if you compare the experience we had locally with some areas of the country, and that investment that we've had and the partnership we've seen with our communities has really paid off. And another example would be how this council has been investing for years in carbon management and improving private and social housing for years. And we've been doing that and investing millions of pounds long before we declared a climate emergency. I think since 2012, we've invested £100 million, for example, in our housing stock. And we haven't relied on our own funds, and we have won external funding. But all councils do that. That's exactly what you do. So I think in order to win that funding, we have to have great skills from our officers and put a huge amount of work in. So they're to be commended for that. And the leadership that's provided enables those bids to go forwards. And I think the point has been really well made. Politically, this budget has been through many cross-party meetings. It's been to the committees, it's been to the recovery group. So it really holds the input of members, it holds the input of community, input of many stakeholders and our officers as well. And I think this is a sober and sensible budget because we live in sober and uncertain times. And the thing which, if you bear with me, just is that I think it's like a tortoise, not a hare. Slow but steady wins the race. And this is the sort of budget that you're seeing now. We're not trying to do sort of fancy show-offy things. We're just trying to allocate resources where they're most needed and to meet our challenges. And I think Skinner has said rightly, our challenges are huge. The pandemic, rising inequality, a decade of lack of investment in the public sector, which has been a decimation to services across our district, and the ecological emergency as well. I think we're really fortunate in our district to have really great strengths, people who'll be our partners in the years ahead, because we can't meet these challenges alone. We've got some amazing people with expertise on the climate, on local and natural resilience. We've got really powerful, strong market towns and our rural communities as well. And as we've learned over this last year, we've got the highest number of small and medium-sized enterprise in the county. And also we've got one of the most caring and effective voluntary and community sectors. And so the budget is very much looking to support that, where we'll have the most long-term impact. And also, as Simon touched on, continuing to lay the foundations for sustainable communities for people and for nature. And just to highlight one example which hasn't been referenced around supporting community hubs, we really see through this pandemic, but even before then, many of our community groups are throwing their arms around people who otherwise there are no services there. For example, if you take just something like mental health, as many other services, those services don't exist, and our community groups hold those people. And in cases, I know examples over the last year where they have actually saved people's lives. So the fact we're putting that small amount of money in to support that, I think is really significant, and it'll build that greater local resilient network. Just this week, a report was published by the Lloyds Foundation saying smaller charities across the country have made a fantastic difference during the pandemic, and we've always supported them locally across the whole district. Another thing, of course, we're doing is we're supporting our climate action network. So we're really working with the community. We're trying to build that in. I'd say it's not as good as it could be, definitely, but we're certainly moving in that right direction. And the equalities group mentioned tonight is really starting to create a model for us as a council where we bring the community on board and we start to make those decisions with them and not to them. And I hope to see that rolling out further across the work we do. It's been mentioned around our ambition around the climate ambitions that we have. And I think we've really been doing this for years, as I said before, around reducing carbon emissions in our buildings, and the many faceted aspects of this council's work will continue to move forwards, and millions of pounds, as I said, that we've invested in that over the years. We've got a very significant council meeting coming up in a month's time, which is going to hopefully be adopting our strategy. And as has been said, building a really robust plan that's going to see us to 2030 and beyond. And we need that plan. So we need to understand what the problem is and then work with our partners to do it. So I think this budget gives us a plan to take us out of the pandemic, preserving those essential services which our neighbourhoods really need, helping keep us safe and everyone in our district, and moving us on to recovery. It is sober and it's sensible, but it has really deep roots, and I commend it to you.
Thank you, Doina. We go to the vote now.
Councillor Baxendale.
For.
Apologies, Councillor Baxendale.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Binns.
Abstain.
Councillor Braun.
For.
Councillor Bryan.
For.
Councillor Clifton.
For.
Councillor Cooper.
Abstain.
Councillor Cornell.
For.
Councillor Craig.
Abstain.
Councillor Curley.
For.
Councillor Davis.
Abstain.
Councillor Denny.
For.
Councillor Dewey.
For.
Councillor Edmonds.
For.
Councillor Fellows.
Against.
Councillor Fryer.
For.
Councillor Green.
Abstain.
Councillor Hall.
For.
Councillor Hurst.
Abstain.
Councillor James.
For.
Councillor Julie Job.
Abstain.
Councillor Hayden Jones.
Abstain.
Councillor John Jones.
Abstain.
Councillor Norman Kay.
Ambitiously for.
Councillor Lydon.
For.
Councillor McEwen.
For.
Councillor Miles.
For.
Councillor Oxley.
Abstain.
Councillor Pickering.
For.
Councillor Powell.
For.
Councillor Prenter.
For.
Councillor Rather.
Abstain.
Councillor Reid.
For.
Councillor Robinson.
For.
Councillor Ross.
For.
Councillor Stedat Kennedy. Councillor Stedat Kennedy.
Sorry, did you not hear me? I must abstain in this instance. Thank you.
Councillor Sutton.
Abstain.
Councillor Tipper.
Abstain.
Councillor Townley.
Yes. Yes. For.
Councillor Tucker. Councillor Tucker.
For.
Councillor Whiteside.
For.
Councillor Tim Williams.
Abstain.
Councillor Tom Williams.
For.
26 votes for and 15 abstentions. That's passed.
26 for, 15.
Okay.
Okay. We'll now move on to six B5. This is Matty. Before we get up, Matt, can I just ask, Skeena, have you not got the blue hand facility?
No, I don't think I do.
You can't use that. So you're doing it physically with your hand?
Yes,
Right.
yes.
I shall watch out for you.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Matty?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, all. I'm presenting to you tonight the HRA account estimates, which has, of course, is a recommendation from SNR and has been to Housing Committee, where I think, I could be corrected, I think it had unanimous support. And of course, rent increases must also come to council when we can do them, of course, because you know, there have been many years with government constraints when we couldn't do them. This budget, I believe, is a budget which addresses the continuing needs of people in our tenure. With our planned preventative maintenance programme, improving their quality of life and helping those in fuel poverty. It is also, I believe, ambitious and innovative. For one thing, we have the Social Housing Decarbonation Fund. We're working with partners across the county to secure funds so that we can be an exemplar organisation when it comes to innovation in the renewable and retrofit environment. If we're lucky enough to be chosen for a partner organisation, this will see some 400k of inward investment to help achieve better outcome for our tenants. In September, we will have a fully costed list of options for retrofitting our properties to meet our commitments as set out in the Council's 2030 strategy. Sustainable investments, however, can only be met if done within the constraints of the available finances. And we're always constrained on finances. This is tenants' money. We are going on a well-proven approach to not be tech-driven, but to be more sustainable with a fabric-first approach. I commend this budget to you, members, and I'm happy to commend it to you.
Questions? Stephen Davis?
Thank you, Chair. And Matty, you can answer this with a simple yes or no. Will you confirm that when I asked Andrew Cummings at Strategy and Resources how much money there was in this budget for us to reduce the carbon impact of our housing stock, he said 0?
Well, I think you are simply oversimplifying this altogether. When you think of the money that we have invested already, and continue to do so, there's 3 million each year going into investing this.
Not in this budget, on the line item, reducing the carbon impact of our housing stock. Andrew's here, I believe. He can confirm that was the answer he gave us at Strategy and Resources last week. You were there. Thank you,
Andrew,
Chair.
you wish to speak? Sorry, Andrew, do you?
Sorry, yeah, Chair. I'm trying to remember the question, Stephen. I think you specifically asked about the energy works, which obviously is coming back to Housing Committee later in the year, I think in September to be looked at. So that.
But this is a budget for this year, and there was not a line item in this budget for that report.
Yeah, so the energy works come back to Housing Committee in September, and then that will get assimilated into the programme at that point, should the Housing Committee and then Council agree.
I think the point I made earlier, Stephen, was that we want to fully cost this before we rush into things. And that's what we're doing.
You haven't budgeted to spend anything. I'm sorry to go on about this. If you're going to cost it, that's fine, but there ought to be some estimate in the budget. Otherwise, you're going to get to September and tell me that you can't do anything till the following April because there's no line item in the budget.
I really don't know how to address that.
Do you have another question, Stephen?
No, thank you.
No. Anybody else have a question? Norman?
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if the Chair could confirm and possibly clarify that at the last meeting of the Housing Committee, when an amendment was successfully put to provide for a programme of retrofitting to be heard in the autumn by the committee, whether it was the case that Conservative members voted against it. Am I wrong in that, Chair?
I'm not sure if they voted against it or abstained, but I think they voted for one bit and not for the other. I really can't remember. There was a bit of confusion around the energy strategy because we amended it.
I can confirm we voted for the amendment because it strengthened the report, but we didn't vote for the report because it still had no timescales, no budget, and no action ownership.
Can we raise our hands when you wish to intervene?
I think you've had that question answered by the leader of the Conservatives, Norman.
Thank you. Steve Lydon.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm pleased to remind people to go through the chair. It's not a free-for-all or a bear garden. Matty, can you clarify for me that solar panels, heat pumps, and the work that this council has done over many years working with its stock, does that not come under the general name of environmental improvements, or what I would call climate change? And in fact, our ambitions to do that are huge, and yet there are certain good reasons that, i.e. cap on borrowing, not being able to put the rents up by this shower of a government, has prevented us from doing that. And in terms of splitting hairs, and what I would also welcome, I think there's some confusion on the Conservative side what retrofit means. In the widest possible sense, I don't think it means new kitchens or painting things unless the paint is reflective or something. So perhaps we could have a definition which might help some of the opposition members actually understand this issue, which is obviously confusing for them.
Andrew, do you wish to come in here, Andrew? Andrew Cummings.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Probably just helps just to give a bit of context. We're looking at this in a couple of different areas now than sort of the environment works. There is a paragraph in the report, paragraph 14.3, which talks about the capital programme having been revised to include additional energy works, and it's got 2.2 million of works to improve the energy efficiency of the dwellings. Now, as Matty rightly says, for the rest of the retrofit project, that needs to be properly costed out, and Housing Committee is asked to go back in September. And if needs to be at that point, when that costed programme is in place, Housing Committee can recommend onto Council to adjust the capital budget. We've looked at the capital strategy tonight, and that says that we can adjust the capital budget in year as priorities develop. So we've got the flexibility to do that. So we've got the 2.2 million there, and then we can build on that when we have that costed programme. Thank you, Chair. I just thought that might help members with some of the debate around that.
More questions?
Thank you very much, Andrew. That's a huge help.
Any more questions?
Would you like me to answer Steve Lydon's question?
Yes.
Thank you for reminding us, Steve. And I know you were involved in housing back in 2012 when I first started there. And in fact, I think we were retrofitting then. We started the retrofitting. We were not only were we replacing bathrooms and kitchens, of course, which isn't to do with retrofit, but we were double glazing. We were putting in loft and wall insulation. We were fitting A-rated gas boilers. So we were doing retrofit before retrofit was invented, I think. And of course, we did PV panels and air source heat pumps, and we all had to go to demonstrations about air source heat pumps because nobody knew what they were. So there were many things done over the years. You know, that's getting on for 10 years now, or 9 or 10 years. So in the last decade, we've done that. We've put in new roofs and roof insulation. So this is what retrofit's all about, not just making the house more comfortable for tenants, but saving them money and saving carbon emissions too.
Charles, Tony, you have a question?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Chair. I think one of the things, Chair, that is very clear is that there is actually a lot of proactive work going on to do retrofitting work, and I certainly went and saw some months ago now some excellent external wall insulation work that was taking place up at Nailsworth. I just wonder. The really question to Matty is whether it might actually help people's understanding if the budget report each year included a list of the planned capital works and major repairs works to illustrate the work that's actually being done on the ground, because that might help members' understanding of the actual practical improvements that are being done to tenants' homes. And the other thing I think is worth remembering is, it's probably a bit unfair to put this to Matty, but am I right in actually understanding that the level of energy efficiency of the council stock on average is actually already much higher than the both the private rented stock in the district and also that of privately owned homes within the district?
That's a very good suggestion, Chaz, and I'd certainly feed that back. And I really can't answer your question, but I would like to think so in the amount of work that we've done, which I've already specified.
If I can help you, Matthew, the answer to that Chaz's question is yes.
Thank you, Simon.
Nigel Studdert-Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have been listening with some interest to some of the accurate and inaccurate comments that have gone on this evening. I just wondered whether, and it might be an unfair question to spring on you now, Matty, so I don't necessarily expect you to be able to give me an answer straight away, but since so much talk has been about retrofit, and a lot of that's going to have to be insulation anyway, the simple one that most people have heard of is doubling the thickness in lofts. But in general terms, since you started what you'd like to call your program, have you any idea of approximately what sort of financial saving has been made across the council's tenants' houses in terms of outgoings for heating against what it was before the work was done? And bear in mind that against the costings on this, some of you will remember a slight purchase problem that always ought to be included in these figures around 2011, 12, or maybe a bit later. But that particular one, Matty, I'd like an answer for, if you're able to give it. If not this evening, which I wouldn't expect anyway, I'd be obliged if you could supply me with one.
Well, that would depend on I mean, all I have is anecdotal remarks from tenants about how much money they do save. So that would depend on whether they were willing to give us that idea, say. Yeah, but I'll do my best.
May I come back? Just to say thank you for that, Matty. Some indication would be helpful, because if there is to be an in-depth discussion on the valid valuation of this work, then we need some outputs as a result of it so a comparison can be made. That's all. It's not pressurizing anybody into anything. It's just to get us a rough idea. The heat pumps, for example, which just for the benefit of those who might be listening, have been around for more than 30 years anyway. They're not new technology. They're very much improved technology, but they're not new. They do give you a comparison for what you might have spent before versus what you'll have to spend now. And I'm looking at the same thing for the retrofit of insulation and such like. And you can include in that, if you like, the solar panels, the same thing applies. All right. I mean, it's not an exam. It's just that it'd be useful to have that sort of information if we're going to have a deep discussion on this. That's all.
I think you're right, and I dare say somewhere somebody will have this information. And air source heat pumps were certainly new to me at that time, so that's the point I was trying to make. But you know, just for interest's sake, I have in front of me here from our member of staff who tells me that since 2017 we've removed 2,200 tons of CO2 from the atmosphere. So what we haven't saved in money, we've saved quite a lot on the planet, I think. So I think we should be congratulated on that.
Well, I think you can put a price on.
And thank you, Joe, for supplying me with that. That was a good thing to pass on to you tonight, I feel.
Thank you for that much, Matty. Anyway, I look forward to hearing the rest in due course. Thanks very much.
I will come back to you. You can be sure of that.
Thank you.
Ryan Tipper, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say, or I tried to ask it in the form of a question, but the word retro, I just Googled it. It says imitative of a style or fashion from the recent past. So I'm trying to work out why the word retro is being used. And I did ask the question, was a retrofit in the same sort of category as doors, kitchens and bathrooms? And what the complaint was at the time was that bathrooms, kitchens and doors were all being replaced where they didn't need to be. And therefore, it could be argued that the budget that had been spent on doing them had been wasted and could have been spent somewhere else. That is all I tried to ask. All I'm frightened of with this, I've had every respect for you, Chairman, and you've always shown me respect and given me some latitude. And all I'm trying to say is that there are members in the administration that don't like us asking questions because you think that they're being asked for political reasons. And that has been stated at county and district level. So anyway, I would like to leave it there. My question was quite open, and I wanted to make sure that our tenants, our residents, are all getting their value from the rates that are being paid or the rent that is being paid. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, Matty, do you wish to answer that?
I'm not quite sure what the question is. You want to know retrofit. I think the word retro and the word retrofit are sort of two different words, and I can see why they're combined, because we are going back to refit, if you like, and I suppose there's a new front door that's got adequate draft protection could come under retrofit, but I wouldn't say that kitchens and bathrooms did. But it's things like insulation and to get a house looking better, you know, for fuel energy and things like that. That's the best way I can describe it to you, Brian. But perhaps we can have a more in-depth talk about it some other time.
Right. Thank you, Matty.
Okay.
Thank you, Matty. Simon.
I was only really just going to help Matty out. I think she's right in terms of the actual savings that individual tenants have. It really does depend on how they use the housing. But I think it's fair to say, certainly in the houses that there is some data on, particularly the sheltered bungalows, the savings were between 30 and 50% on their bills after they've been insulated and had air source heat pumps and solar panels. And that then was hypothecated the carbon savings. So some of them were quite significant. And I've just looked at some old figures from that early scheme, not the recent schemes. I think in the scheme that was referred to that did have some financial problems towards the end, I think the saving was about 1,200 tons of carbon on our work. Obviously, we need to move forward. So there is figures around. So it is important to monitor in the future, but generally there are savings. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon, for that, helping me out.
Thank you. Nick Hurst.
Yes, Chair. I was using my knowledge. I was going to offer an observation on what retro means in this context, which is specifically the installation of any technologies which were not available in the original specification, which they could come along after the event. They could be additional to the original specifications, but essentially anything that is within the original shell is a replacement, not a retrofit.
Thank you for that too.
Can we have a seconder then? Catherine Bourne, do you wish to speak now or reserve your?
Yeah, I'd be happy to speak now, if that's
Go
okay.
on then.
Yep.
Carry.
Great, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say thanks to everyone who's been involved in preparing this budget, and also all the Housing Committee members. We had a really good discussion back in December about this budget. I think it's an excellent budget for the housing revenue account, because it's all about continuing to develop and improve the service that we provide to tenants, which is, after all, why we have this this funding in place, and it's one of the core services that we provide. Andrew's mentioned that we're continuing with the major works programme, so we've got over 2.2 million in the budget for the coming financial year to do that. So that's about improving the energy efficiency of properties, it's about reducing heating bills for tenants, and we do have the ambition, which is the whole house retrofit for every house in the housing stock by 2030, which is a much more ambitious programme. And we want to make sure that we've got the financing in place to do that. And over the next financial year, we're going to be doing the work to make that happen. We're continuing the new build programme, and we're putting in new build properties to a much higher thermal efficiency standard, to a SAP rating of 86 out of 100, which will also deliver some really good carbon savings and bill reductions for tenants. Making good progress on the sheltered housing modernisation programme, again, which has cross-party support, with works now underway in Stonehouse and starting soon in Cannes. We're finally delivering on on other elements as well, in terms of the new build programme. And with the carbon neutral 2030 strategy, we will be appointing the retrofit officer post, which is going to be part of the HRA staffing. And then we're part funding also the carbon neutral officer to work with tenants in relation to carbon neutral issues as well. So I think it's really about the council's continuing support for social housing and building these new energy efficient homes for residents. So I'd really encourage all members to support it this evening. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Catherine. Steve Robertson.
Thank you very much, Chair. I shall be supporting this excellent budget. Just today in my own ward, I saw 1950s non-traditional houses at Ringfield Close being knocked down, and very, as Catherine just pointed out, high efficient 21 new properties being built, and these are the first council buildings, solely council houses, to be built in Nailsworth for over 40 years. So I shall certainly be supporting that. Also today, I had an email to say that retrofitting, yes, will be done. There's another 7 houses on Lawnside, which are non-traditional houses that are going to have new external insulation and new roofs, and that will save tremendous amount of money for those residents up there. And it was mentioned as well about, I remember going and visiting the replacement for the Woolaway homes on Old Common in Midgehampton, and the tenants were telling me then, following that visit, when I saw some in the street, were telling me how in the winter they'd hardly needed their heating on. So I will certainly be supporting this budget. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. Jenny?
I was going to say I should be supporting this programme. It's a well worked out budget, and officers worked very hard to
let the housing committee consider their options and move forward. We've got the new home program, which is delivering new homes, which will be easy to heat for our tenants and make a lovely place to live. We've got the sheltered modernisation programme, which is not only on time, but within budget, because we have an extremely efficient team there. We have the retrofit, which is delivering a fabric first approach. So we're getting the basic right. We're making sure every home has good loft insulation. It has good windows. It has good wall insulation. And this is more important in the first place to get the foundations right before we think of ambitious technology, which has got to be thought about slowly and efficiently so we don't make expensive mistakes. I commend this report and thank everybody for the work they've done.
Thank you, Jenny. Nick Hurst.
Thank you, Gary. I'm very conflicted on this because members know that I'm as passionate about council provided housing as anybody on the other side of the chamber, in this case a virtual chamber. And I spent 9 years of my career building council houses for Stroud District Council. So the tenants have a very privileged position actually, because we as a responsible housing authority maintain their buildings, maintain their homes, upgrade them here with retrofit technologies as and when those become available. And they generally get a pretty good deal actually, which I as a private citizen in my own house can't necessarily afford to pay for my own facilities on my own house. So the tenants get a very good deal. And I absolutely accept that as a principle that should happen, and indeed the value that those technologies afford to the comfort of our tenants and to the contribution it makes towards energy efficiencies and all of those kind of considerations. Absolutely accept all of that 100%. My problem with the increasingly, and I have said this in the past, so it's nothing new to you. My problem is what is becoming a slow fusion of HRA principles, that the HRA self-funds the repairs and the maintenance and the improvements that it does to its own properties, and the slow infusion of capital injections to increase the stock. Now, you may wonder, with all of the advantages that being a council tenant brings, why people would ever want to exercise the right to buy. And yet we know that the housing stock is continually being diminished by people exercising rights to buy. I'm not going to express my view on that. But that is a reality. So my problem is the 30 million, which is in the capital program, which is, for me, is insufficiently allocated in terms of what it's going to be used for, in terms of creating new houses. I think there are some fairly flaky ideas not flaky, unidentified relationships to purchasing land, to purchasing private houses inside the housing stock. Every time you go out and buy a house which is already made, you're paying a premium in terms of market expectation, which is then reduces the amount of money which is in the fund to support the housing program. So I am very conflicted by this. There are some very good things in it. I absolutely accept that, but I think there are some rather large holes as well, and certainly some question marks.
Thank you, Nick. Stephen Davis, then Paul Denny.
Thank you, Chair. And I echo some of what Nick said. I think it would be churlish to say that there's nothing good in this budget and that we haven't done good work in the past. And I would also want to, put it on record, there are absolutely no plans or suggestions or has been in recent history that we would get rid of the housing stock. We support that and believe in it very strongly. But I will be voting against this budget for 3 reasons, which I will give you in increasing order of importance. The least important reason, but is worth noting, is that there's no medium-term saving identified in this budget for bringing the repairs in-house. Now, I understand that in the first year, particularly in COVID, it's quite conceivable that there would be costs, not saving, but we were told this, and there were good reasons why it would generate savings, as I understand it. They have not been identified in the medium-term budget and should have been so. The second one is the continued failure for us to actually successfully build new homes. We talk about it endlessly. We issue press releases saying how we've influenced 200 new homes. I think that means we gave them planning permission. Actually, we built 5 last year, 11 the year before that, and 8 the year before that. Do you know, I can tell you, Eastington Community Land Trust has managed to build 23 in a shorter period of time than that. And it's not a money issue. We have actually allocated over the years 30 million or 32 million, I think the number is, to build and develop new houses. We've only ever spent 20 of that, so 2/3 of what we set out in the budget. So there is clearly something not right. Either we set the wrong budget or we don't know how to spend it. I think Nick made some interesting points in that area that I don't want to go on. But the single biggest reason I can't support this budget is the one that I started with in my question. And that is that I'm not the only person who attended the briefing that said we have a huge amount to do if we're going to reduce, and I didn't use the word retrofit. I love the way we got off into a discussion on retrofit. If we're going to reduce the amount of carbon created by our housing stock. Actually, the way it was presented was terrifying and impossibly expensive and hard to imagine how we're going to do that. But here we are, 2 years on from declaring climate emergency, and the Alliance all patted themselves on the back for voting for a report that had no numbers, no actions, and basically said we'll come back in September, hopefully with a plan. And as we've heard, there is no allocated budget specifically against that. So I think we're just, this is not good enough. We can do better. We should do better. And I do hope that going forward, what is the purpose of opposition? It's not fun opposition, I can assure you. But the purpose of opposition is to challenge. And I don't think I'm doing anything different here than asking the question, why are we not addressing the big elephant in the room that we actually have to do something? It is going to be very difficult and expensive, and yet 2 years on, we have no plan. Thank you very much, Chair.
Paul Denny?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that at least we still have council housing to improve. Most of the surrounding Conservative districts have sold off all their council housing. And in fact, I seem to remember that when we came to power, we managed to see off an attempt to do the same. So I think we've done pretty well, all told, in upgrading our existing council stock. We did have a scheme at one time putting an awful lot of solar panels on the roofs of houses. But unfortunately, the government won't allow us to recoup the cost of those solar panels when the houses come under right to buy. So that acts as a disincentive, in effect, to upgrade our council housing, which is pretty poor, really, to be honest with you. Central government should be encouraging us to do this. Now, it's great to see that government have indeed put £2 billion into the Green Homes Grant for 2020-2021. Unfortunately, having opened in September, so far they've only managed to spend 6.3% of it. I say spend, they haven't actually spent it because of all of the companies that applied to be accredited to do the work under the scheme. I think so far only 3 companies have been accredited, and none of those have been paid for the work they've done so far. So we now find out that the whole scheme is going to be scrapped, and they're not going to roll the money over and try and improve the scheme and get it running again so that all of this money can be spent on retrofitting. No, they've just scrapped it. So £2 billion that could have been spent on retrofitting, scrapped. So when you compare our track record on the work that we've done in Stroud District Council with central government, we're miles ahead of them. We really are. I mean, you know, it's one thing to talk the talk, but you need to walk the walk. So I will be supporting this budget tonight, and I will be supporting the fantastic work that I think we've done over the last 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Nigel Cooper.
Thank you, Chairman. Just wanted to comment that there have been, I think, 3 references to the naughty Tories trying to sell off our council houses. But I mean, I would remind people it was a Labour government at the time who was asking us to do this. As it was, we went ahead with what the government of the day was proposing. As it happened, it didn't happen, and we missed out, as people, long members will remember, we missed out from getting a grant which would have, I believe, would have built about 240 additional houses, and of course we wouldn't have been saddled with huge amounts of debt, which we are now. But I just wanted to correct this business about the naughty Tories trying to sell off the council houses. Thank you, Chair.
Steve Lydon.
Can we move to the vote, Chair? Please.
After Simon Pickering, perhaps.
Thank you, Chair. I won't be long. I'd just like to say that I'm going to support this budget and this report, and I'd like to thank all the officers for their hard work on this, particularly those who are having some real challenges in juggling numerous contracts and making things happen. I think actually overall this has been a really encouraging debate, because the questions, some of the difficult questions that have been asked, I think are good questions to ask, and the answers that have come back. But reflecting on it, I think all members in this debate want to see this council move forward. Some of us want to move forward faster than others, slightly different ways, but everyone appears to want to move forward and actually improve the quality of the homes for our tenants and make them much more energy efficient. So in 30, 40 years time, they're not frying in overheated houses, getting the sufficient amount of insulation in there to deal with the warming planet, and also to cut their bills. So I hope that members, even if they don't physically vote for this budget now, actually are all supportive of this budget in reality, and we can move forward. Thank you.
Auntie, do you want to sum up then? We'll go to the vote.
Well, very briefly, Chair, because Catherine very kindly, in her seconding this budget tonight, said much of what I wanted to say. In fact, I think she said all of what I wanted to say. Stephen, by all means, challenge, but traditionally in housing, we've always worked together, and you're on housing committee, and it's a shame a lot more of this couldn't have been discussed in committee with members across the floor, instead of coming and beating us with us now. I think we've done remarkably well this year, and I think it's really, really unfair that we should be judging the in-house property care. It's not the best year to have any sort of understanding of savings that we may make at all. It's the wrong time, it's the wrong place. What the officers have done this year in the light of COVID, having to deal with tenants, nervous tenants who really don't want people in their homes, to do things for necessary repairs or anything like that, I think has been just incredible, with the constraints that's on them as well, because home working has brought all sorts of difficulties to so many people, with homeschooling as well. So I think I'm hugely thankful to the officers for preparing this budget under very difficult circumstances. I think is fair to say, and I really do hope, in the spirit. I'm really sad to hear you voting against it now, when you didn't vote against it at Housing Committee, I may say. But I would hope as many of people across the chamber vote for this for the good of our tenants. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Matty. We'll go to the vote then. Stand by.
Councillor Baxendale.
For.
Councillor Binns.
Against.
Councillor Braun.
For.
Councillor Brine.
For.
Councillor Clifton.
For.
Councillor Cooper.
Against.
Councillor Cornell.
For.
Councillor Craig.
Against.
Councillor Curley.
For.
Councillor Davis.
Against.
Councillor Denny.
For.
Councillor Dewey.
For.
Councillor Edmonds.
For.
Councillor Fryer.
For.
Councillor Green.
Against.
Councillor Hall.
For.
Councillor Hurst.
Abstain.
Councillor James.
For.
Councillor Job.
Abstain.
Councillor Hayden Jones.
Against.
Councillor John Jones.
Abstain.
Councillor Kay.
For.
Councillor Lydon.
For.
Councillor McEwen.
For.
Councillor Miles.
For.
Councillor Oxley.
Abstain.
Councillor Pickering.
For.
Councillor Powell.
For.
Councillor Prenter.
For.
Councillor Rather.
For.
Councillor Reid.
For.
Councillor Robinson.
For.
Councillor Ross.
For.
Councillor Stadat Kennedy.
Must abstain, thank you.
Councillor Sutton. Councillor Hayden Sutton.
Sorry, abstain.
Councillor Brian Tipper.
Against.
Councillor Tomlin.
Against.
Councillor Townley. Councillor Chaz Townley.
Time.
Councillor Townley.
Where are you? Crap.
For. Again, sorry.
Councillor Whiteside.
For.
Councillor Tom Williams.
For.
26 votes for, 8 votes against, and 6 abstentions. Carried.
26 for. 26 for, 8 against, and sorry,
26 for, 8 against. And
8 against and 6 abstentions. Well, I think that concludes the business for this evening. I'll leave you all to your Ovaltine or cocoa, whichever you're going to have.
Well done, Chair.
Good night.
Well done,
And I'll
Chair.
see you next month at the next meeting.
Yeah, well done,
Thank
Chair.
you, Gary.
Good night, all.
Generous,
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you very much, Gary.
Thank you, Chair.
Well done, Chair.
Well done,
Night,
Gary.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.